it goes and get one of them scratch offs.
Anaconda Malt Liquor!
Anaconda Malt Liquor gives you a little.
I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right. Cause then I start to taste them. I say, so I knew something was wrong. I knew something special about it, you know? So.
If you haven't already watched this film, The Cloned Tyrone, well, spoiler alert. But if you have watched it, I guarantee you missed these Easter eggs I'm going to show you here today. I've looked through many other YouTube videos of creators reviewing and decoding this film, but I haven't heard anyone touch on what I'm about to here today. Are you ready? Alright, let's go. How about a quick recap, shall we?
A pimp, a hoe, and a drug dealer walk into a bar.
That's it. No, but on a serious note, this film was directed by Jewel Taylor, also written by Taylor, along with film producer Tony Rittenmeyer. And like our good friend Kiefer Sutherland, who plays the character Nixon, said, the three main characters in the film are a pimp, Slick Charles, a hoe, Yo-Yo, and a drug dealer, Fontaine, aka Tyrone. These characters are played by, of course, Jamie Foxx, Teyana Paris, and John Boyega, the guy from Star Wars. And so basically, to summarize, Fontaine strikes an opposing gang member, Young Dealer, with his car. He retaliates by shooting and eliminating Fontaine after Fontaine collected some money from Slick Charles, who must have a cocaine addiction. This is when Fontaine wakes up for the first time, as if he was Notorious B.I.G., having a juicy moment, thinking it was all a dream. But that was not the case. Fontaine visits Slick Charles once again, who can't believe his eyes after he saw what happened the night prior. This is when the trio is first introduced in the film, as Fontaine learns from the second witness, Yo-Yo, that he was indeed eliminated the night before and was not dreaming. They find an elevator which leads down to a small cloning lab where Fontaine discovers one of his clone body doubles for the first time. This is also when Slick Charles discovers the nefarious white powder that makes him laugh a lot and act irrationally. The trio then reunites at the local Hotbox Spicy Chicken to discuss the ongoing clone mystery. But this is when Slick Charles connects the dots, figuring that the white powder he tested in the lab must be in the chicken because everyone eating the chicken is laughing uncontrollably. The trio then follow an unmarked delivery van from Hotbox Spicy Chicken to a beauty salon where Slick Charles finds a key card inside the van but ends up getting trapped in the back as the drivers take off to their final stop, the church. Fontaine and Yo-Yo end up saving Slick, and together they discover another elevator inside the church. They go down, acquire some disguises, and find out the government agency Oversight is conducting mind control experiments on the residents of the Glen. Slick Charles finds a clone of himself, and Fontaine finds many clones of himself down there. They end up leaving through an elevator, which leads to a strip club where we're introduced to DJ Strangelove and his mind control music. DJ Strangelove orders the club attendees to chase the trio out of the club as if it were an episode of The Walking Dead. But the zombies ease off. This is when Nixon is introduced, who delivers us more disclosure than the US Congress hearing on UFOs.
What now?
After the interaction, Fontaine seemed to have lost all hope and finds out his mother is not real. Yo-Yo gets kidnapped. Fontaine and Slick Charles find out Yo-Yo has been kidnapped and end up unifying with the opposing gang to bring down Oversight and save Yo-Yo. Fontaine finds out he's a clone of the lead scientist at Oversight, but ends up shooting and eliminating him. All the clones from Underground are released, and news stations nationwide cover the event. And in the end, we find out that Tyrone is a clone of Fontaine living in what appears to be the West Coast.
Sir. Here outside of J-Bo's pawn shop.
Ain't that you, Tyrone?
And as for the Easter eggs I said I guarantee you missed, there were many throughout the film, like the Anaconda malt liquor and its obvious connection to the 2009 film Black Dynamite that I showcased at the beginning of this video, which I later found out was actually discussed by the director Jewel Taylor in a Netflix interview. But if you're familiar with the 1964 film titled Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, you may have caught the relation between this film's character, Dr. Strangelove, and the DJ we saw in the strip club scene from They Cloned Tyrone. If you're unaware of the character Dr. Strangelove from the 1964 film, well, he's a former Nazi scientist and nuclear strategist who advises the President of the United States and is played by actor Peter Sellers. And ultimately, the Dr. Strangelove film is about a US General, Jack D. Ripper, who becomes, quote, deranged and believes that the communists are fluoridating American drinking water, and in response initiates an irreversible nuclear strike on the Soviet Union without the president's permission under the guise of the unremittable classified Plan R. And at the end of the film, you're left with the impression that Dr. Strangelove was pretty much responsible for the dubious Plan R that led to the nuclear strike against the Soviets. Obviously, Dr. Strangelove and DJ Strangelove have very similar names, but in the 30 seconds of screen time that DJ Strangelove has in They Cloned Tyrone, you can see he makes a number of distinct hand gestures, all of which I see as determining factors when relating him to Dr. Strangelove, for a good reason. This is because Dr. Strangelove has a condition known as alien hand syndrome, a condition where the person affected experiences their limbs acting on their own without any conscious control over the actions. This condition affects Dr. Strangelove's entire right arm, and he also wears a black leather glove over his right hand. Kinda like Darth Vader from Star Wars, who lost his right hand, also finds himself destroying whole worlds with weapons of mass destruction. Alright, moving along. The next Easter egg I found is pretty deep. It was at the part after Slick Charles got stuck in the back of the van, and so while Yo-Yo and Fontaine are looking for him, they visit the elderly homeless man named Frog, asking him for clues as to where they might be able to find the van. This is the third time we see Frog in the film, as Fontaine has a habit of visiting the corner store to get himself a scratch-off and a bottle of Anaconda malt liquor, which he shares a portion of with Frog each time. But in this third scene, Fontaine is, for the first time, actively seeking answers from Frog.
Youngblood and Foxy Brown.
The scene opens up with Frog calling Fontaine and Yo-Yo Youngblood and Foxy Brown. We'll note that down. Then Fontaine asks him,
Straighter is greater. What the f does that mean?
what straighter is greater means, because at the beauty salon, they see the van delivering 2 Clean Perm Cream, a hair product which uses that slogan. But the reason they stopped to visit Frog in the first place is because in the second scene that we see of Frog, he mentions that slogan to Fontaine, as if he were trying to allude something to him.
Youngblood, straighter is greater. You hear me?
So after Fontaine asks Frog what straighter is greater means, he responds,
You mean it on your head, in your head, by your head, on your head, and under your head.
This seems like nonsense, but we'll find out soon why it's actually not. And then Frog says,
In the land of the blind, Foxy Brown.
in the land of the blind, Foxy Brown. Then Fontaine seeks clarity, and what Frog says next was the absolute giveaway.
In the land.
Hey, why you say that? Why you say that, Frog? What you know?
You gotta go to the last stop on the train, Youngblood.
The last stop on the train. We'll note that down. And some of you may have already figured out where I'm going with this. But then Frog says,
Doot,
Frog. One straight answer.
The answer. Where did everybody go to get answers?
Where does everybody go to get answers? Yo-Yo assumes he means church, and he affirms that by saying,
Church. Church?
The big man will always point the way every time.
Church.
the big man will always point the way. Fontaine doesn't know which church to look for, and Frog says,
Frog, it's 10 churches in the Glen. Which one?
When you're trying to get out of Babylon, where the fuck else you gonna go?
So we have Youngblood and Foxy Brown, Land of the Blind, Last Stop on the Train, Where Do You Go to Get Answers, Big Man Points the Way, and Where Do You Go to Get Out of Babylon. And you see, I've written out Frog's script from this scene so we can analyze and decode all this with clarity. Now, starting with Youngblood and Foxy Brown. Well, according to Urban Dictionary, Youngblood is an inexperienced person, especially one who is newly prominent in a field of endeavor. Well, obviously a clone reference, but kind of like me with YouTube. But more on Youngblood in a minute. Foxy Brown is an actual person, or a clone, who really knows at this point, but she was born September 6, 1978 in Brooklyn, New York. And when I dug deeper on the name Youngblood, I came across a rhythm and blues hit song from 1957 called Youngblood, created by a group named The Coasters.
I saw her standing on the corner. I saw her standing on the corner. A yellow ribbon in her hair. A yellow ribbon in her hair.
And so when I conceptually relate these two musical references together and I combine Brooklyn, New York, where Foxy Brown was born, and the song titled Youngblood by The Coasters, I got The Coasters in Brooklyn, New York. Where do we find The Coasters in Brooklyn, New York? Coney Island, or should I say Cloney Island, the land of the blind. More on that in a minute. And what's the oldest coaster in Coney Island? The Cyclone. And then remember Frog said,
What you know?
You gotta go to the last stop on the train, young blood.
well, if we look at the map, we can see Coney Island is the southernmost point of Brooklyn, the borough, and it's also the last stop on the train for the subway lines D, N, F, and Q. If you're from New York, you probably know the last stop on the train is Stillwell Avenue. This is where 5 million people arrive each year from all over New York and America to escape Babylon and essentially enjoy themselves. My favorite part about this is that the final stop of the Q train is in Coney Island. And in 1624, when the Dutch colonists first settled in New York, they named the island Koning Island, which in English literally translates to Rabbit Island. And since the Q train's last stop is in Rabbit Island, well, there's a bone to chew for the QAnoners out there whose slogan is literally, where we go one, we go all. And did I mention Trump Village is a 7-building apartment complex found in Coney Island? And for those of you who are into gematria, remember the dubious classified Plan R responsible for the nuclear strike in the 1964 film Dr. Strangelove? Well, yeah. And as for
The big man will always point the way every time.
well, if you look at a map of Coney Island, we can see the massive cross-shaped pier as a symbol for the big man pointing the way. But not only that, if you watch the film They Cloned Tyrone, you'll remember in the disclosure scene when Nixon uses the words Olympia Black, causes Fontaine to fall under his complete control, which this only works on clones. But if you remember the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, well, you were not fooled by this one. Olympia Orange. Did I get you? And to build more on the point of the land of the blind, there is an amphitheater located in Coney Island, and they mention the exact street name that aligns with the entrance to the amphitheater before showing they were spying on someone's conversation named Keisha in Brooklyn.
604 over on 22nd.
You can hear the oversight workers say, "I've got a 604 over 22nd," and in Coney Island, the amphitheater entrance is located on 22nd Street. And in the next scene, at the top of the conversation recording paper the worker is using, you can see the words Keisha and Brooklyn. This further alludes to the musical relation we found earlier and the land of the blind. The craziest part is, the worker says he's got a 604 over 22nd, and the police code 604 is actually a description for throwing missiles according to policecodes.net. Now, if we read the script of Frog in that third scene we see of him and interpret it from bottom up, Frog is basically confirming all this to be true. Where the F else are you gonna go when you're trying to get out of Babylon? Every time, the big man will always point the way. Where does everyone go to get an answer? The answer? Toot toot. You gotta go to the last stop on the train, Youngblood. In the land. In the land of the blind, Foxy Brown. And under your head, on your head, by your head, in your head, on your head, it means Youngblood and Foxy Brown.
Putin got it. I would talk to him about it all the time. I never mentioned the word nuclear. You never heard me mention the word. You know, my uncle was a professor, a great professor at MIT for a long time. I think he has the longest, Dr. John Trump. And he would talk about a lot of different things, and it was very interesting to me. For years, I talked to him. Passed away. He's a great, great gentleman. I think it's the longest tenured professor in the history of MIT. But if he wasn't, he was very close, because he was there for almost 40 years. And we talk about things, and he said, you know, someday they'll have a suitcase, and in that suitcase, it'll be nuclear, and you'll blow up New York City out of a suitcase. And I said, no, Uncle John, that can't possibly. He's right. The power is so incredible. You can fire up a submarine and run it for years on essentially a tablet. Run it for years. You don't mention, I call it the N-word. You have two N-words. You don't mention either one of them. The nuclear word you don't mention, because the power is so destructive. I met with professors at MIT, and I was preparing for a debate. I wouldn't say it was a long preparation, but I did want to talk about nuclear because I consider it to be the single greatest threat the world has, far greater than global warming, like not even a contest. And I had these people come down. They were very smart, very expert. And I said, so when we start talking about nuclear in a debate, how would you handle it? And they looked at me, one in particular, and said, sir, you can't talk about it. You cannot talk about it. I said, what does that mean? He said, it is so massive, it is so destructive that you cannot talk about it. I understood exactly what he meant. And